My name is Bethany Young-Holt, and I am the director of the initiative for MPTs, or the IMPT, a project of CAMI Health, and we're housed at the Public Health Institute. I'm joined today by Susanna Moore, our program associate, and Madison Landgren, our research assistant, who are available to provide tech support. So I am really delighted that the IMPT is hosting this webinar today as part of our Let's Talk MPTs series, which is sponsored by the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD. And for this webinar topic, we're so pleased to collaborate with partners from the USAID-funded Matrix project, which stands for Microbicide R&D to advance HIV prevention technologies through responsive innovation and excellence. And the Public Health Institute, where the IMPT is housed, is happy to be among the Matrix partners. So this webinar will provide a valuable opportunity to hear from MPT and HIV prevention product developers and other experts on the topic of transitioning MPT product candidates from preclinical to clinical stages of development. So we have nearly 100 people registered for this webinar from across time zones and joining us today. So as we're waiting for others to join and enter the Zoom room, we invite you to type in your name, your affiliation, and where you're located into the chat feature. We do want to note that everyone will be muted during the presentations, and then you can unmute yourself during the Q&A. One of the things we really like to do through these forums is provide a platform for networking and engagement as best as possible virtually. So we'll be unmuting, and people can pose their questions or add their questions in the chat. So just keep in mind as you're listening to the presentations, you can add those questions in the chat. And if you have any technical issues, please chat with Susanna, who is our tech host. Also, the webinar recording and the related resources will be available at the impt.org soon after the webinar. So today's discussion is focusing on MPT product candidates from preclinical to clinical development, which is quite complex. I'm excited to have this terrific lineup of experts on this topic with us today, who will each share presentations and participate in a moderated discussion. Our discussants are Jim Turpin of TurHow Consulting Group, Meredith Clark of CONRAD, Ariane von der Straten from University of California, San Francisco, and School of Medicine, ASTRA Consulting, and Ruth Merkatz from the Population Council. The facilitated discussion will be co-moderated by Nyaradzo Mgodi of Harare Health and Research Consortium and myself on behalf of the IMPT. Joe Romano, who will also be joining us as well to contribute. So as I mentioned previously, the webinar is hosted by the IMPT. The IMPT was launched in 2009 as a product neutral body to foster enabling environment for the successful advancement of MPTs. And just to remind everyone, MPTs are multipurpose prevention technologies, are products designed to simultaneously address HIV, other STIs, and or unintended pregnancies. And the MPT field and their development is complex, involving multiple research disciplines, including the traditionally more siloed fields of HIV, other STIs, and contraception. And as the central hub for the IMPT over the past decade, CAMI Health has built a product-neutral learning network for the MPT field that brings together these multidisciplinary stakeholders from around the globe with this common goal to advance MPTs so they can reach the hands of end users. So with since the launching of the IMPT, we've been tracking the MPT pipeline in an online database. And I wanted to just point out that A couple months ago, we completed our annual update of the MPT database. This is an interactive tool that features an advanced search engine and downloadable tables, among other resources. And there are currently 25 MPTs in development with active funding. And as you'll see in this next slide, most of these product candidates are in early stages of development, while some are in clinical stages. So if you're interested in learning more, you can check out the MPT product database at mpts101.org. And if you're aware of any MPTs that are not reflected in the database, please do let us know. So with support from the NICHD, we've launched this discussion series to engage experts from diverse disciplines to help address MPT and HIV prevention priorities and gaps. And past topics have included patenting and intellectual property considerations, regulatory pathway considerations, and integrating end user research into development. And all of these webinars are on the IMPT website. So we are really looking forward to an engaged and lively discussion today. And now I am delighted to welcome our featured discussions. So I'll provide a brief overview of each of them, and then they can expand on their backgrounds during their remarks. So first is our co-moderator, Nyaradzo Mgodi from Harare Health and Research Consortium. Nyaradzo is a clinical pathologist with 15 years of experience conducting clinical trials assessing topical microbicides, intravaginal rings, oral injectable products for HIV PrEP. And as a clinician and clinical trialist in Africa, her perspectives will be invaluable in today's discussion. Jim Turpin is president and owner of TurHow Consulting Group and is a former NIH program officer, and in 2021 was the chief of the Preclinical Microbicides and Prevention Research Branch and deputy director of the Prevention Sciences Branch at the Division of AIDS at NIH. Meredith Clark is Senior Director of Operations at CONRAD and Associate Professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Eastern Virginia Medical School. She has 13 years of experience in user-centered HIV prevention and MPT product development and innovation, project management, and leadership at CONRAD. Ariane van der Straten is adjunct professor at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, and is an independent consultant through ASTRA Consulting. And since 1993, she has done research on women's sexual and reproductive health globally, focusing on new products to prevent HIV. And Ruth Merkatz has served as Director of Clinical Development for the Population Council's Reproductive Health Program and oversaw the development of the Council's reproductive health products and large-scale clinical trials required for regulatory review. She's held leadership positions in women's health at the FDA and at Pfizer. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Nyaradzo to hear more of her background and a little bit more about the Matrix project. Nyaradzo?
So thank you so much, Bethany, and hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to co-moderate with you on this important webinar. So I think you've done, thank you for the kind words in terms of introducing me. So you did mention that I'm a clinical trialist and I'm a researcher in Sub-Saharan Africa here. But I think what I would like to really just bring home is that I'm an African woman. Maybe not so young, but I'm an African woman who needs two important services, HIV prevention and pregnancy prevention. And as you know, women here in Sub-Saharan Africa, we really remain at risk for HIV. And we've got many, many other issues. You know, I have to worry about looking after the family, going to work and doing many, many other things. So I need a product that is going to to protect me as an African woman. We are the homemakers. We women in Chitungwiza, where I work, they go to the fields, they find water, they find firewood. So they shouldn't be concerned about HIV prevention, about pregnancy prevention, about STI prevention. So let's make sure that they have, I shouldn't forget myself, we have a multi-purpose prevention technology that is going to cater for our needs as African women and other at-risk populations. So really, I'm happy, and I'm always saying that it's personal. HIV is personal because over the past, earlier on in the pandemic, we lost so many close relatives, friends, family, and so forth. So we really want something that is going to continue preventing HIV, especially in women like me and other African women. So I'm happy also to be a member of Matrix, and I see that we've got many of our colleagues here from Matrix. I saw Sharon joining in. I saw Tess, so they are here to assist in terms of discussions on Matrix if there's a need to go further and above what I would have talked about. But like you said, Bethany, Matrix is microbicide research and development to advance HIV prevention technologies through responsive innovations and excellence. So as Matrix, we aim to develop a range of HIV prevention products that are acceptable to the end user, that are affordable, that can be scaled up, they're scalable and deliverable. And we need this to be done through efficient, benchmarked portfolio management. So this is a collaborative initiative, and it will positively accelerate early research and development for new HIV prevention products, for at-risk populations, including African women. Yeah, and it's designed to expedite research and development products for prevention of HIV, like I've said. And it's really a collaboration between Global North and Global South activities, and all key activities are led by North-South partnerships. So this is really a great initiative where us here in the South are working with partners in the North. And in the South, mainly we are working in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. Yes, and Matrix is partnered with 4 product developers and working on 6 novel products. And these products are at various stages of development. Yes, so in general, that's what Matrix is all about. And I'm happy, especially happy, this webinar, we're looking at MPTs and Matrix, and hopefully we'll have an MPT that will cater for the needs of at-risk populations. So in a nutshell, I won't spend much of time discussing what Matrix is about. We'll come back to it time permitting. And like I said, Sharon is here, Tess is here, and many, many other of our Matrix colleagues are here. So thank you so much, Bethany. Back to you. I'll be back in a jiffy when we've had some presentations. Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you, Nyaradzo. That was really great remarks and reminding us why we're all working in this so hard on this work. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim Turpin.
Okay, so let me see if I'm successful with the technology. And I will. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
And I think I have to swap. Okay, can you see the full slide set?
Yes, we're good.
Fantastic. I am successful for the day. So I want to thank everyone for joining, and thank you, Nyaradzo, for that Matrix explanation. Save me a second or two here. So it's always nice to hear other people's comments on Matrix. So I was given the title, Considerations when Transitioning an MPT Product from Preclinical to Clinical Development, or as I like to say, Welcome to the Valley of Death. And as said earlier, I'm Jim Turpin, TurHow Consulting Group. I'm ex-NIH. I retired last year so that I could have opinions and express them loudly and longly. I'm also a consultant for Matrix. So I lend my expertise to Matrix. Sharon invited me in, and it's been a very interesting experience that has been very challenging and a lot of fun. So let's start off. Prevention drug development. This slide shows the basic timeline from basic science to product development to clinical testing. So what is really product development? So to start product development, you really have to understand the basic biology of HIV and HIV susceptibility. That gives you the targets to actually start doing product development. And I like to think of product development as this giant meat grinder that we take all the different expertises we need: chemistry, reproductive biology, clinical trials, contraception, marketing, behavioral and social science. And we basically grind off the pieces we need. We assemble them into a product, and we move that product to first-in-human trials. And that's kind of prevention drug development. But it's actually more complicated than that. And when we start talking about MPTs, it's even more complicated. It's a layered activity. So if we take HIV drug development, we have to identify a candidate, formulate it, test it in animals for safety and possibly efficacy. We have to understand its in vitro, in vivo properties. We also have to do biobehavioral sciences. We have to know who will use it, how it'll be used, how it fits into the life of the users, and create a need and desire to use. We also have to do regulatory science. We have to determine its safety in animal models. That's good laboratory practices, GLP. We have to manufacture it. That's good manufacturing practices, GMP. And we have to do clinical trials. That's good clinical practices, GCP. And if we do an MPT, now we add contraceptive drug development to this layered mixture. And there we have formulation challenges, specialized in vitro assays, in vivo assays. There's GMP issues, and really clinical trials to measure pregnancy prevention. So there's a lot of stuff there. So what about the Valley of Death? What makes it so critical to drug development? I'm going to use a simile of Death Valley, California. You know, Death Valley has known hazards. It's hot, it's dry. But when something really goes wrong, like the most recent floods, it really goes wrong in Death Valley. So that's a good simile for translational research. So let's break down this timeline again and look where translational research is at. Well, we have product development, as you saw earlier, but we can break product development into drug discovery and translational research. And we mentioned Matrix earlier. Matrix actually sits in the translational research pot, and also a product activity also funded by USAID and PEPFAR. Mosaic fits down further in the pipeline in the implementation area. But how does this relate to the Valley of Death? Well, the two recognized Valley of Deaths for drug products are translational research and taking things into clinical practice. Now, why is this so important? If we look at everything we have to do to get a product to OTC, we have to develop it, we do the clinical trials, we do generic product, we do OTC. At the same time, we have to think about marketing, we have to think about behavioral factors, implementation, manufacturing for the clinical studies, manufacturing for consumer manufacturing. And then we all that's overlaid on federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and guidances. So if we look at translational research, it sits right here, this big blue box. So if it goes wrong, nothing happens. And that's the reason we call it the Valley of Death. So really what makes this the Valley of Death? If we look at drugs in general, 96% of them fail in the Valley of Death and never get tested in humans. Now, only about 0.1 to 0.4% of drugs ever make it to approval. So what you're seeing here is the biggest kill-off of drugs and drug concepts happens in the Valley of Death. So why is that? To do that, we have to actually look at what product development is. It's really opposing forces. One is we're taking hundreds and thousands of candidates potentially down to one licensed drug. That may take us anywhere from 5 to 30 years to get there. It's all a long time. We also have a cost. We start off at pennies to thousands of dollars for drug, and we escalate that through a pipeline that could be 3 to 30 billion depending upon the drug. And if you look at translational research, what you see as you move from drug discovery to translational research, you see a big increase in costs. So drug discovery versus translational research. Why is there this cliff that kills compounds? Let's look first at the objective. Drug discovery, the objective is discover a new drug or validate a target with a drug. For translational research, it's move the discovered drug to clinical testing and licensure. The economics, drug discovery can be done with private small USG small grants at R01. However, when we move to translational research, we have more costs. So we start getting private involved, big pharma, NGOs, the US government development grants like NICHD's P50, contraceptive centers, the U19s and UM1s that were done by DAIDS to support development of prevention strategies. And our approach, drug discovery, is hypothesis-driven research. But when we move to translational research, we're now focusing on product testing. We're trying to meet regulatory requirements. So what's our outcome? If we look at drug discovery, it's a new drug concept and publications. But if we go to translational research, our outcome has changed. It's regulatory approval for first-in-human testing. So anything in economics or approach that fails can stop the development. And my own personal opinion here is if you look at the approach, one of the biggest things that stops development is the inability of the developer to switch from a hypothesis-driven research to focus on product testing. Now, why is that? So let's look at the types of failures first before we talk about specifics. One of them is a no-go outcome. You fail a specific test. One of my favorites is a teratogenicity. Years ago, there was a great anti-HIV antiviral. It was beautiful. Everyone was excited about it. Put it in a reproductive safety test, and it was teratogenic. So teratogenic, the CRO I was working for used the compound later on as a positive control for teratogenesis. Infrastructure, and I use refrigeration for stability as the example here, but many things can be here, where if you have a refrigeration for stability, all subsequent developments must include refrigeration capabilities. And that means your failure points can be, can you manufacture it in controlled temperature? Can you translate it to a warehouse? Does the warehouse have controlled temperature? Does the truck that goes to the pharmacy have controlled temperature? Does the user need controlled temperature? So you have more failure points that you have to deal with. Anticipated issues can also be a failure point. Intellectual property, access to drug master files, known stability or metabolism issues. We know a lot about chemical entities. We can look at them and say, that's going to be unstable. And finally, the costly surprises. Our GMP scale-up fails or unexpected testing. The FDA says you got to do this extra study or else. So now let's look at all the stuff that you have to do and can go wrong in the translational research. Clinical quality and regulatory control of your drug substance and excipients and drug products. You have to do that. You have to do specific safety studies for the drugs. You have to develop and validated analytical assays for your APIs, your existence, your drug products, but also for your animal model matrices and human matrices, serum, plasma. You have to do GMP. You have to show you can actually GMP manufacture in the translational research, manufacture the material so you can go to clinical trials. You have to have drug delivery device specific studies. So if you make an IVR that has welds in it, you have to prove those welds don't come apart in the human, and you have to prove those welds are stable during storage. You have to do packaging compatibility and stability. You have to do regulatory document preparation, and that's not only regulatory consultants, but providing the chemistry and manufacturing control section so you prove you can produce it, as well as clinical trial plans. End user and human factor studies are also important. You don't want to make a product that no one will use. That's a no-no. Formulation stability. You've got to make a final formulation and show it's stable in the environment for the extended time you're going to use it there. You have to additional safety studies that may be required. And finally, other studies the regulators may require. My favorite example is an implant study. We did a pre-IND for implants. Regulators said, hey, that's great, we like it. However, before you go to clinical trials, we want you to show the implant can be reproducibly put subdermally and doesn't migrate. Guess what? You got to do a pig study. So one of the things that, one of my particular peeves is I have many people who say, well, if I repurpose drugs, it's simpler. It shouldn't have any translational research issues. If I take tenofovir, oral tenofovir and put it in a gel or put it in an IVR, I take injectable cabotegravir and put it in an implant. No problem. So let's look at this big list. What is on here do we get a buy on? We maybe get a buy on the additional safety studies because what we're seeing is that each step of the way, we have to do things for a specific product. We may have issues where we know we can GMP manufacture the drug substance, but we still have to do our drug product. We know we might be able to detect a particular drug in, the original drug in blood, but we have to detect it in vaginal fluids or in rectal fluids. So there's a lot of things we still have to do. So you still have to pay attention to this stuff. So conclusion, to wrap this up so I'm not too far over. Product development is really a complex process. Translational research, bringing a product from development to clinical testing, is challenging. But the challenge of the Valley of Death has been characterized by many as a heavy lift. It's the killer. It's the one that so many of us fail at. And that's because it needs not only funds and time, but attention to the little details. So I'd like to thank PEPFAR USAID and Sharon Hillier with the Matrix and Tess with the Matrix Award, and all the people who are part of Matrix. Thank you.
Jim, thank you. That was fantastic. We have time for maybe one clarification question. If anyone wants to unmute yourself or put a question into the chat for Jim. Okay, if not.
I was perfectly clear.
Pardon me?
I was perfectly clear.
You were very clear. I have some questions, but I'm gonna, I'll hold off until the end. So, all right, thank you. Great job. Nyaradzo, do you have a question?
No. I just wanted to reassure Jim that the presentation was very clear, but definitely I'm sure there will be questions. We'll have some questions for you, Jim. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Meredith Clark.
Great, and I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right, and I lost seeing all of you, but we'll go with it. So it was great listening to Jim's talk. I think he gave a fantastic summary, and hopefully my talk coming next gives a nice opportunity to see some of that work in practice and seeing it through perhaps a different lens, and that being the product developer's lens, and a few of the journeys I myself, as part of CONRAD, have been able to be a part of. Before I dive in, most people on this call probably are aware and know CONRAD or familiar with CONRAD, but if you're not, or maybe not aware of everything that we're working on, or what it is, how we capture ourselves, CONRAD is a nonprofit biomedical R&D organization with a mission to improve global health through the development of innovative user-centered technologies. Our roots from 35 plus years ago started in contraceptive R&D, but very quickly scanned to this complex Venn diagram you see here on a number of elements, including HIV prevention and other STI preventions. But at the core of many of the programs and products that we're developing are MPTs. So from a product developer's journey, and here you heard just from Jim all the different considerations that need to be put out there to really advance and translate a product, and particularly an MPT product, from the preclinical stages to the clinical stages. And I guess from my perspective, what I see when I look at all of those lists is the balancing act. How do you balance all of those elements effectively, timely, and sufficiently? You know, first, you have all the elements that go into the research strategy, which is perhaps how most of us product developers and scientists naturally want to think. You know, what are the studies needed for preclinical proof of concept? What are the IND enabling studies needed to make sure that the product is safe, stable, those welds don't come apart? What is that regulatory strategy to go into the first in human study? Perhaps more challenging, but very important from the early steps, is also what is that regulatory strategy for looking all the way ahead for market approval, particularly in this emerging space of MPTs. We're not just talking about one indication, we're talking about at least two, and that gets very complex. And thinking about, you know, do you submit one IND initially? Is it for HIV prevention? Is it for contraception? Is it for something different? Do you change plans over time? Those are some of the things that need to start being thought about early on. End user research and end user preferences for the product. The big no-no, Jim said, you don't want to develop a product people don't want to use. Absolutely. And incorporating that into the research strategy is key. What are the studies to create the clinical proof of concept? And not just that first in human study and thinking about that, but do you do all of that in one clinical study, one phase one, that's kind of the end all be all, or do you do something smaller and then do expanded studies later on? All of these things are balanced by the other considerations that may be external considerations you have to lean on. What are the funding opportunities that can support the research and development, not just in the near term, but then what's the funding strategy long term? And I'll show you a few examples of the challenges there. What are the timelines to do that R&D work? And if it's a funding opportunity for 3 years or 5 years, what can you do in that time most effectively? You have to think about the intellectual property and the business development strategies up front. And that may or may not be the strengths of various product developers when starting off, but that is something that is really important if we want to really see success the long term. In addition to end users, we have to be looking at the other stakeholders, dialogue with funders, dialogue with policymakers, dialogue with supply chain, trying to understand you know, whether someone will really buy the product and distribute the product are all important factors, often neglected in the early considerations for a new product development. All these together really drive towards the necessity for creating a stage-gated type of R&D structure. And that's where also developing what we call value inflection points at each of the elements so that you can progress through this list here on the left of some of the proof of concept at the early stages, but create enough value added so that you might entice future funders to continue that development journey with you. So what I'd like to do next is I'm going to go through two specific examples that of CONRAD products that we've developed through that first valley of death from preclinical to clinical stages. But before I do that, I guess all those elements you saw balanced together, what that ends up leading towards is, at least what you think, what you want to think, is this plan that's highly integrated, milestone driven, highly rational, scientific, value added, highly rigorous. The reality that we will see, though, is definitely not that. It's always with needing to be open to learning, adapting and changing and evolving. That can be due to the research findings that you find and related to the product itself, but it's also very much important to look at what's happening external to the product's development. That can be the landscape evolves in time, the needs of the end users evolve in time, and the considerations of how to move the product from preclinical to clinical and beyond needs to be adaptive and nimble across that path. So the first example I want to provide in this journey is the one about the tenofovir and tenofovir intravaginal rings. These are two multi-purpose prevention products. The first one being for HIV and herpes prevention, which is really leaning on the learnings from a decade plus ago, roughly, of the tenofovir gel. This was a coitally dependent vaginal gel that in the Caprisa 004 trial and published title here was demonstrated to be significantly significant in this phase 2b trial against not only prophylaxis of HIV, but also herpes, providing proof of concept. The challenge, though, and as everybody on this call probably recalls, when we took that to a further phase 3 trial, we were not able to demonstrate by indication that the product was effective, in large part because of low adherence. And this, of course, is the product developer of today's nightmare and our lesson learned heavily. This was a gel that was pre-floated into a commercial vaginal applicator. It was packaged in parts. The user had to put these things together and then apply the product both before and after sex. Very difficult to adhere to, very difficult to package, very bulky. Lots of lessons learned that I hope every product developer on this call has already put away in their back pocket. What all this led to, though, was the concept of the vaginal ring for the long-acting, continuous, easier, more portable, more discreet use of tenofovir, either alone for HIV and herpes prevention or in combination with a proven contraceptive, levonorgestrel. Here you see a picture there. To date, and I'll show you the journey of the clinical work we've done, but to date, this is a product that is used for up to 3 months for the protection of those 3 indications as I mentioned. It's the most advanced MPT rings in the field. We've completed 6 clinical trials to date, and I'll walk you through those very quickly in the next slide. We've demonstrated thus far that no cold chain storage required, and 3 years of shelf life at room temperature has been demonstrated. We have clinical proof of concept demonstrating not only the safety, the acceptability, but also the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics as intended for both the tenofovir for HIV and herpes prevention and for levonorgestrel for unintended pregnancy. We, through the studies designed and tested thus far, the rings demonstrate that they're pharmacologically forgiving, meaning that because tenofovir, and particularly its active metabolite, tenofovir diphosphate, lingers so long in the tissue for days that you can remove, the data demonstrates that you can remove the ring for a few days and still be protected. Further, based on the design of the ring and the type of the loading or the dose of levonorgestrel, the contraceptive we're providing, we've also been able to demonstrate that not only does it provide surrogates, markers of contraceptive effectiveness, but also provides minimal impact on bleeding patterns, which is found to be very acceptable and desired by the users in those clinical trials. Further, while we haven't done the actual scale up and manufacturing at an automated scale, we've also even demonstrated and put together a roadmap so that partners of the future have what they need in front of them, the feasibility and the map of how to automate and validate this for large scale trials. So altogether, what you see is a product, 2 products, in fact, 2 MPTs that have made it into that first valley of death of clinical trials, have completed actually a combined 5 clinical trials that look at safety, efficacy, pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and acceptability. This has been conducted in the US, in Dominican Republic, and in Africa. And the product is ready for scale up. There haven't been any findings that are considered failures from a technical perspective. We've also, across that path, conducted end user research, both human-centered design that has looked at the needs and improvements to packaging and messaging of these rings, and the educational materials or training that might be needed in the way to help with their introduction. We've also conducted acceptability of across all of these studies and surveys in the clinical trials themselves, as well as in the Quattro acceptability study, many of you are familiar with, and my colleagues here in this webinar, Ariane and Nyaradzo, quite familiar with. And that was looking more rigorously at product preferences, product attributes, the acceptability before and after use, and adherence to the use of the product, all supporting this product. Now, that said, when you look at the timeline and the development history of this product, we've completed our milestones on the preclinical side, on the IND enabling side, demonstrating and meeting all of our benchmarks throughout the clinical phases over the last several years. Everything has been hitting the marks. We've included across that time and integrated end user research into that as well, so that we can further inform, further implementation. we've been able to piece together R&D funding through particularly the support of USAID cooperative agreements through this time, as well as with added leverage support with NIH, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the CDC. However, despite all these successes, for the last year, these products are starting to get a little dusty and on the shelf, and we're still seeking for further support to take these to that next pivotal trial. In the meantime, we maintain our regulatory and intellectual property so that we can make that an opportunity for future partners. Another example, the tenofovir alafenamide and elvitegravir topical inserts. These are a very different type of MPT that still fill an important, an unmet need in the method mix for HIV prevention MPTs. These are flexible, on-demand topical inserts that are intended, and we've demonstrated proof of concept for either pre-exposure prophylaxis or post. They're intended for vaginal or rectal use. They provide low systemic drug exposure. All these combined to meet the needs of those segments of the population interested in not having systemic drugs through their system all the time, or are looking for just protection, for infrequent sex opportunities. We've developed this product specifically through a very iterative and integrated approach, integrating with end user input throughout the process, which has resulted in product that is discreet, highly portable designs of packaging that make it that support those particular attributes. The product itself is easy to administer digitally or with the assistance of an applicator. And it's rapidly dissolving, providing no leakage or any other attributes that might discourage or lower its acceptability. Funders and other supply chain distributors may be of interest to this as well, because it's highly economical. It's manufactured much like an oral tablet, and so it's easy to manufacture at scale and very transferable. To date, and I'll show you the timeline in a second, we have preclinical and clinical proof of concept demonstrated for this particular MPT. We've conducted SHIV challenge studies in non-human primates, demonstrating vaginal PEP and PrEP efficacy, as well as rectal PEP efficacy as well. Sorry, rectal PrEP is what that should say. And in first-in-human trials, we've conducted single administration studies, both vaginal and rectal, that demonstrate long-acting PK after a single dose of the drugs that then would support that flexible on-demand use, as well as ex vivo modeled or pharmacodynamic data supporting the anti-HIV and anti-herpes use of the product. Here's the timeline for this product, and one of the lessons we learned on this particular product development journey was with the first generation product. It combined tenofovir and emtricitabine, the same drugs you find more or less in Truvada, oral Truvada. You see here the picture of it, looked like an oral breath mint, and that's what our end users thought in that clinical trial. It was a full study that had single and multiple dose testing for safety, acceptability, PK and PD, and acceptability. And very quickly, we learned that while the product's PK looked promising, the safety was promising, the product leaked and created a white residue, and the acceptability was low because of the shape and confusion of how to use it. That story has led us towards improvements clinically and testing different platforms and shapes, conducting human-centered design to better understand how would we design a product that better fit into the lives of the target end users. More extensive end user input through that Quattro study, as well as MTN-035, the Desire study, which looked at the same product but used rectally. Expanded clinical studies of the now tenofovir alafenamide and elvitegravir combination, both first in women and after rectal use. And now we have clinical proof of concept on all of that. And with thanks to the support of the Matrix program that you heard a little bit about, we're now combining the pieces of this story to now take the product to expanded phase 1 trials and expanded end user studies, and incorporating that early human-centered design work that we generated early on. So in summary, I guess my takeaway is that the trek is across multiple valleys of death, and I would argue it's actually more than one, it's more than two, it's multiple even in that clinical trial space. But it's clearly worth it, and it's something that we must continue to take our lessons learned and be nimble, so that we might be successful very soon in this future. Now that we have HIV prevention products on the market, it's time for us to have MPT products on the market. With that, I want to thank all the funders that have helped support these particular journeys, as well as the opportunity to speak with you all, and IMPT for inviting me to share my journey story with you all. Thank you.
Meredith, thank you so much. I think we all really appreciate just sort of the reality check in your journey of, those case studies of, what really is involved as a product developer, going through these valleys, these challenges, and how long it takes, how interconnected and how complex all these things are. I think your remarks really feed so well into what Ariane is going to be talking about next. So I think what we'll do is, if the people can hold on to your questions, add them to chat, and then we can move on now to Ariane, and and then we can have open up the mute and have conversation afterwards. Thanks again, Meredith. Over to you, Ariane.
Yep. Hello. Let me see if I can. Need to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Just a second. I think I may need to first move into viewer mode. Oh, here it is. View. Okay, just a second. Okay, can you see my presentation now?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like we're getting something.
If not, I'll have to have Susanna help.
Says double click. There we go. All right.
Okay.
We're
So,
seeing your notes, though. I don't know if you want to change, if there's something you can do to make it into viewer mode.
that's what I was trying to do.
Swap the display.
Okay, thank you. Swap display. Thank you, Gustavo. Does this work now?
No, there.
Yes, there
Okay,
you go.
perfect.
Thank you, and sorry for the little glitch. So
No
thank
worries.
you to Bethany and the IMPT for inviting me today. My focus will be on end user researcher during the translational research and the product development. And how can we make products, MPT products that women will use? So the good news is that what we've learned through decades of survey research and other end user elicitation is that globally and across end user group, over 80% of women do prefer an MPT to multiple single indication products. And it does make sense because there are important benefits that have been mentioned already. For example, an end user who participated in a ring trial that Meredith talked about before said, well, an MPT is a win-win product. Because it takes care of multiple issues that I have in one single product. It's easy to use. You have to only remember one thing instead of two. It improved the framing in case there are stigma associated with HIV prevention, because particularly a contraceptive indication is easier to explain to others. And then it simplified access with fewer clinic visits, because you only have to go and get one product instead of two. There are perceived barriers, and we have to remember those. For example, if there is a desire to conceive and the MPT has a contraceptive indication, so we may need to have multiple products. There are concerns about increased side effects because of multi-drug presence and drug-to-drug interaction that needs to be eased. There's also generally a fear of the unfamiliar, as it's a new biomedical technology and an MPT may not be understood well by user or the community. And then, as Meredith mentioned, menstrual perturbation is a big issue with contraceptive products and may also impact acceptability of MPTs. And so it's really important to address. In general, prevention methods are preferred when they are low burden on user and the healthcare system. They are neutral or enhancing sex, particularly from the perspective of male partners. They are preferred if they are discreet and are invisible to self, other, and others. And then I think the understanding that we demedicalize the framing and present these methods as women's health product will favor acceptability in a lot of context. So things to think about as we develop these MPT products. So the next thing I wanted to highlight is that with this desire for MPT, there's actually an expanding toolbox of PrEP and MPT option. For PrEP, we all know that pill, ring, and injection have been approved and are being rolled out with different stages in the access process. We do have a lot of MPTs that are also being developed, and that sort of leverage the HIV prevention products that are perhaps a little bit further in development. And again, the idea here is that with more option, there'll be better choice, improved coverage, and improved impact in the HIV and reproductive health space. And that's what we have seen with contraception. Opportunity for choice in multiple methods have increased contraceptive uptake, improved health outcomes, and persistence with given method when women have an opportunity to choose. We also know that prevention and contraceptive needs will vary over a woman's reproductive life. So more than one method is important. Now let's move to the anatomy of a prevention product from the perspective of an end user. And even though we are talking with MPT about biomedical products that in the simplest way are a delivery system with co-formulated drugs, we have to remember that every single MPT is a biobehavioral intervention. And as you can see on the left side, there are social behavioral aspects that are really key to understand and integrate as well. So let's start with the drugs. Well, they need to be safe and provide as minimal side effects as possible. The drug delivery form needs to be, if possible, invisible or at least very discreet, familiar, so it's easy to use and to learn to use it. Packaging and use instruction and educational information are important too. Meredith mentioned this for the FDI that they are CONRAD is developing. So we need a packaging and instruction that are easy to understand, a product that is easy to administer and to explain to the user and the significant other or influencer. Access and cost needs to be frictionless and burdenless. Social context and influencer need to provide positive reinforcement and social approval for the product. And we still need adherence support, and it needs to be empowering, motivational, and positively framed. And when all that is done, we have to remember that tastes do change over time. So this is a continuous process that needs to be optimized even when we reach the market. And finally, no product is perfect. So we need to remember that trade-offs are needed. Now, when and how to engage end user? Well, I think we have failed in the sense that we've engaged end user too much with their cognitive aspect and not realizing that they have a mind, a heart, and a body. And there are methods that we can use to really engage more the emotional or the perceptual side of user that are really important in order to adopt and use eventually a prevention product. And then also we have to remember that the target population doesn't live in a vacuum. We need to bring in key influencers, providers that are gatekeepers for many of these products, and understand the social and cultural ecosystem of where the user are placed. In terms of when to engage the end users, I hope we will convince you that it's never too early. And on this slide, it's sort of a schematic of research and development stage that may be informed by social behavioral research, starting with ideation all the way to the left, preclinical, clinical, and going all the way to introduction and delivery. And there are methods for social behavioral research at every stage. I'll talk about a few of them in the next few slides, and as a way to engage these end users. So for example, in one study conducted through the MTN 045 or CUPID, we used discrete choice experiment, which are survey method that assess stated or hypothetical preference of users. And DCE are useful when a particular product characteristic or attribute is not yet known. For example, its efficacy, and before an active or placebo product is available and testable. And so that was done with 400 heterosexual couples in Zimbabwe and Uganda. And one of the things we found out is that longer duration dosing is preferred, and familiar dosage tends to be also preferred over less familiar one. What we learned also, and you can see this on this graph on the far right, is that daily dosing is actually one of the more problematic dosing frequency, and that users tend to prefer on-demand or long-acting product because it's less burdensome for them. So we did also qualitative exploration that engaged many of the senses when we worked with Kim Woodrow at University of Washington to understand how preliminary acceptability of a drug-eluting fabric MPT prototype. We conducted focus groups where we also used comparator products, which were placebo gel, as Meredith explained to you, and the vaginal contraceptive film to contrast and compare with the fiber. And this really provided insights into some characteristics in terms of shape, size, insertion process, and even how the product dissolves that may be important at the early preclinical stage. Another example is an MPT implant that has been under development at RTI International, and where at the preclinical stage we optimize through end user research with women and provider how the implant may look. We, for example, understood that longer duration was prioritized over number of rods, and that it was important from a provider perspective to use existing trocar as inserters, like the Jadel trocar, because they were trained and used to that trocar, and so we made sure the implant fitted that particular type of trocar. At another stage, we can also use proxy or placebo products in clinical studies, and it's a safe way with a crossover and a choice period to test various delivery form attribute without exposing user to the active. This was done in Quattro, as mentioned by Meredith, in Trio, and in Desire, along with other studies continuing with that Desire, model right now with active products. One thing we did learn in Trio and Quattro, as you can see here, is that there's a learning curve in acceptability and preference. This represents the most preferred product at baseline and post crossover when all the products were tested in trio and in quattro. And there was quite a bit of shift in preference and in the rating of the products after trying them. And we do need to understand that, because that is important in terms of real world rollout, when we need to anticipate that user will change and switch product, because after trying them, they may decide that one attribute is preferable to another. And we also used participants as co-designer to help us in trio make recommendation about how to improve the products they had tested. And they came up with, important feature, for example, longer lasting pill, an injection that may be less painful, or that could be applied through a sponge, or long-acting products like implant and IUDs that may not be felt during sex, whereas the ring is felt by some partners. I think it's also important to remember that efficacy is not everything. And so here in Quattro, we elicited that information through discrete choice experiment and showed that a lower efficacy product was preferred over a higher efficacy product if that lower efficacy product had other attributes that were preferable to the user, including preventing pregnancy. And we did see that with active product in REACH, where we enrolled approximately 300 adolescent girls and young women in this crossover and choice design with the dapivirine ring and oral PrEP. And after trying these two products, over 2/3 of the women chose the ring for its convenience and ease of use, although its efficacy is lower than daily oral PrEP. So now I want just to finish with Matrix. You've heard about it. And there are both MPT and single indication products that are being developed and funded through Matrix right now. The left one are MPTs, the right one, the products are currently single indication product, but they have an opportunity to also include an MPT indication through addition of levogenestrol. You've heard about the FDI from CONRAD, and so I'm not going to repeat this, but it's a really important on-demand flexible product that fills an important gap in MPTs. Oakcrest is developing an MPT ring that would be longer acting, 1 to 3 months, with a non-ARV and a non-hormonal agent that would really fit the need for those who dislike hormonal contraception. The University of Pittsburgh is developing a long-acting film that is non-removable, low cost, ensure complete drug release with no waste, and is planned to be unnoticeable during sex because it's very inconspicuous. And CONRAD is developing an implant and injectable that may also have an MPT component. So in summary, research with potential users should start at the ideation stage and persist through rollout into the real world. End user are our co-designer, and we should listen to them and engage them as early as we can with all their senses. And let's remember that a successful prevention product requires not just a safe and efficacious drug, an efficient drug delivery system, but an empowered and effective user. This is my acknowledgement slide, and thank you very much for listening.
Ariane, thank you so much. Looks like you might still be sharing your screen. Great. Thank you. That was such a rich presentation, and it's really exciting to see all the work that you were able to share that's going on right now, both on the end user side and what's in the pipeline within the Matrix Consortium with support. So I'm going to now hand it over to Ruth Merkatz. And again, please hold on to your questions for Ariane. And after Ruth's presentations, we will open it up for some discussion. Over to you, Ruth.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, but we
I'm
can't
just
see your
trying
slides.
to bring up my slides to share the screen. Just not finding the share screen on Zoom. I
It's
have
at the
my
bottom. It's at the bottom. If you, the bottom of the screen, hover right there at the bottom. There's a green.
well,
You see the green bar?
I'm just not on the Zoom. That's the problem. Go back to Zoom.
If helpful, we can share on our end.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Find the Zoom.
Madison, would you like to share Ruth's slides?
Sure.
Are they up?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be part of this wonderful panel with so many terrific colleagues, and hoping that everyone out there is having an opportunity to learn a lot about this very complicated process. And as you can see on my slide, I think about developing an MPT as a very complex endeavor, as everyone has already, I think, illustrated. And there is theory behind this. It's called complexity theory. And these theories, I think, speak to the development of an MPP, which is highly sensitive to changes, any alterations along the way, and especially complicated when you're dealing with a product that may have a new chemical entity plus two chemical entities with different mechanisms of action. And next slide, please. As we think about the sources of the complexities and the opportunities that we are confronted with, I think it's important to consider the mission of the very different and many organizations that we must interact with as part of the development process, who our partners are, who our collaborators are, and how we interact together with all of the collaborators that are working together on these projects. And if we think about it, I think starting with the organization that I've been working with, the Population Council, we have a mission to improve well-being of generations around the world. We have our supporters, the USAID, for example, that works to promote the health of people around the world on behalf of America. Our funders, for example, the NIH, that lead research and training, and our developers that we work closely with, are manufacturers who have their own set of issues that they are confronted with as they try to develop and manufacture the products that we're interested in. And frequently we will have to work with a pharmaceutical company that will enable us to get the product out there and provide distribution that will be so necessary should we be successful in this developmental pathway. And of course, we have many collaborators when we're running our clinical trials. And here I've listed just a few of them as we worked on the development of the Annovera ring that was approved just a few years ago. We had clinical sites in Latin America, in Europe, in Australia, in the United States, on the East Coast, on the West Coast. And that, of course, makes the whole process fairly complicated. And then there are the regulatory bodies, and is their mission aligned with our mission? The FDA, for example, they need to protect the public health. the European Medicines Agency. They're interested in evaluation and supervision of the medicine. So they're going to be looking over our shoulders very, very carefully before they enable us to advance from one phase of development to the next. And if you're working in the sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you might be dealing with SAFRA, and their mission is to safeguard the health and well-being of everyone in South Africa. So they're going to be looking with a very critical eye at what we're doing. And then we have, moving on to the next slide, as we develop our products, what are we thinking of as the target product profile? And this really sets in motion how we move forward in development. We are focused on the acceptability by the users, but we're also thinking about the realities of production, of distribution, and in cost. And some of the attributes that will feed into this target product profile will be, who are we interested in really developing the product for? What would the product look like? In this case, I've featured a vaginal ring. What will the action be that we're trying to move into with this particular product? Will it be something that's used continuously? Is it something that's used on an on-demand basis? Is it something that is used cyclically? And of course, we have to set the parameters for the efficacy of the product. What will we allow in terms of side effects? What will our goal be? For many of these products with the contraceptive, we have to really be concerned about the bleeding profile and the effect of menses. And of course, as we've talked about, the storage issues, what kind of a shelf life do we need for the product? What is the cost going to be in the various stages of development? How long will it be? Do we want this product to be effective immediately, or will there be a time lag? And what about for women of childbearing potential, the return to fertility, which of course will be very important with the contraceptive aspect of the MPT. So using Jim's slide of the Valley of Death, particularly in translational research, I thought I might illustrate several considerations or several actual experiences that we encountered in developing the Annovera, which was approved just a few years ago and had a very, very long timeline from basic science through drug discovery, through translational research, through the clinical trial period, and then finally through approval and into clinical practice. So maybe I could first talk about what happens when the results emerge. So in a clinical trial. So one of the things that we want to be particularly aware of are the side effects. And this is something that we're always tracking very, very carefully. And if I borrowed from a colleague at the Population Council, Anru Jain, who coined the leaking bucket phenomena in family planning. And that simply shows that when things start to leak, in this case, side effects, that we're going to have users who are going to discontinue the product, and this will only add to the unmet need, which still is a major issue in the field of family planning. And I know there's certainly an unmet need for prevention of HIV in women. So if we looked at an early, what we were able to achieve, and it took a long time of getting the dosage right, what we were able to achieve with Annovera. Here you can see a very nice cyclical pattern of bleeding on a regular basis at the top of the slide, and these represent different cycles over a period of a year, and the bleeding comes approximately through day 28 of the cycle. And this was a very, to finally get our dosage right was led to this optimal bleeding pattern for women who prefer to have regular menses. But in developing the next generation of rings using nesterone and estradiol rather than ethinyl estradiol, and using estradiol to enhance the safety of VTE protection versus EE, especially if the product is going to be used with women who are obese. We are using estradiol rather than EE. And the first early studies with the NES E2 ring used 10, 20, and 40 micrograms per day of estradiol. And this is what we saw in the beginning of working on that product, and with continuous use versus getting 2 days off. And you can see that we were needing to modify very quickly dosing of the amount of dosing that will be used in the NES E2 ring in order to get the bleeding profile suitable so that we would not run into the leaking bucket phenomena. So that's an ongoing, those are ongoing studies currently. And if we go back to the leaking bucket again, you can see that another issue is how does a participant respond to a product, and whether the participant's response, how does that line up with other priorities and vision for a product within the realities of development within an organization. And here, if I could just give you an example of a development of a product that was a gel that women applied to their abdomen. In our early studies, which were dose finding, we were able to achieve determination on what the dose might be of nesterone along with estradiol in order to achieve ovulation suppression and have acceptable bleeding. And along with doing the dose finding study, we also did some acceptability interviews. And this is a small study in phase 2. We had 18 participants and were able to do acceptability interviews with 16 of them. All of them reporting that the product was easy to use and were satisfied with the product, and noted that it was less invasive than injectables or IUDs and easy to remember. The majority reported that they liked the feeling of putting the gel on their abdomen. And several of them even noted that they thought that they had some positive effects on their skin and on their hair. There were no negative comments at all. So, wow, this sounded to us like a winner. We need to move forward with development. However, competing priorities and other issues made it difficult for us to move ahead at this particular time with this product that at this point seem to be able to check off a lot of the important parameters related to advancing in product development. And then, of course, in product development, when the regulatory agencies can sometimes impose upon you new requirements, so that adds something into the valley of death that we may or may not even have anticipated, and can make it extremely difficult to move ahead. And I give the example of what happened as we were about to embark on the phase 3 clinical trial of the nesterone ethinyl estradiol contraceptive vaginal ring, which is now Annovera. We were all set to go. Our sites were lined up. The ring had been manufactured and scheduled. We were scheduled to start when the regulatory agency sent us notification that we would need to double the size of the trial, that we would have to have 20,000 treatment cycles rather than 10,000, and that 400 women would need to complete 13 cycles as opposed to 200 women. So this was, as you can imagine, I'm sure, a difficult new requirement for all of us. The letter came in. I was happened to be at the council. It was between Christmas and New Year's, and saw that letter, and I thought, well, where do we begin? And it took us a year, and that was probably very quick. And so we had to be nimble, and we had to be very determined to be able to move this phase 3 clinical trial forward. We were grateful that NICHD came to our rescue with additional funding and with sites through the Contraceptive Clinical Trials Network, so that we were able to have our 2 pivotal studies and achieve the 20,000 treatment cycles that would be required for submission of this product. But I have to say that there are, in many situations, the valley of death would definitely have stopped us at that point in order to achieve to the success in the final development and final push for this product. And there are some other things that also I think we have to think about, and I certainly learned to appreciate how much the challenges can be from the legal side, and thinking about the financial realities of full development, and thinking about such aspects of development such as managing the intellectual property, and how important it was for us, and I think for all developers, to have outstanding collaboration with folks that are not necessarily involved in the clinical trials or in the scientific development, but support us in every aspect of the journey, whether it's in our purchasing services, whether it's in developing and getting all of the contracts in place for all of the many collaborators that we have to work with, whether it's in patenting patents that become important, managing the progress and relationships all along the journey. So on top of all of the clinical and scientific challenges that we meet, other groups become critical to our success and to the final development. So as I started out, the process is very complex, as I think you can all agree. But in the end, I think if we can be successful, we will have achieved something that is not only worthwhile, but a major contribution to the women and to all of those who we are striving to improve the lives and keep them safe and keep them healthy with our products along the way. So thank you very much. It's really great to be part of this panel as we look to the future.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was really excellent way to sort of wrap everything up on this panel. I want to thank Jim, Meredith, Ariane, and Ruth for all your thought-provoking presentations and your generosity today. We're now going to open it up for discussion. I see, we're close to the time, but we have time for a few questions. So there are a few questions that have been put into the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Nyaradzo. We also have a brief survey that we'd love for you all to complete at the end. So Nyaradzo?
So thank you so much, Bethany, and thank you to our speakers. Wow, what a trek it has been, a journey through the Valley of Death. We've really experienced this product developers journey. So thank you to all our speakers, and like you said, we'll open this for questions. I see there's a question. Is it Boku Erna who asks about a general question? Will the hypothetical advantages of MPTs versus products provided separately for each indication, will they be realized? Will MPTs, sorry, I have to read this again. So this is a question for Ariane. So they're asking if MPTs will really increase uptake of prevention. Do we need social behavioral sciences? And will the, if each MPT, each product is looked at differently, will the hypothetical advantages be realized? So I'll start with you, Ariane, and then we can come to anyone else. Ariane?
Thanks for the excellent question. And I do think it's a very valid one because between hypothetical preference and enacted or actual choice and preference, we know they may not always align. And actually, we are actually working on a study that is led by Lisa Haddad at the Population Council through the HPTN, it's HPTN 104, where the first MPT, which is the dual prevention pill that has been developed by Viatris and contains the ingredients of a combined oral contraceptive along with Truvada, is combined in a single pill. And using a design that I presented with a crossover period, choice, and use, we will compare the DPP to a two-pill regimen, and this study will be conducted around in Southern Africa, along with the US, with 1,000 women, including adolescent girls and young women. And I think the proof will be in the pudding for this particular product in terms of understanding if it does increase correct use and it improved preference and acceptability. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ariane. Ruth, Jim, anything to add there?
Well,
Or Meredith?
I'll make a quick comment. This is Jim.
Mhm.
It reminds me, this question reminds me, you never know till you get to the end. And I remember years ago sitting in a meeting being told by a major pharmaceutical company that there would never be an injection drug for HIV. No one would use it. It can't be used. You're wasting your time proposing developing it. So as we think of MPTs, we're doing our best to create the best drug possible. We won't know until we get one, but if it's like it was with the original prevention drugs, injectable preventions, when we get there, there will be a section of the population that wants to use it. So it's worth our time and effort to take the time to do the hard thing, which is get something to clinical trials and to efficacy trials and to implementation for this very important, as you mentioned, Nyaradzo, very, very, very important outcome.
Thank you so much. Ruth, your hand is up.
I just wanted to add something that came to my mind from the time that I spent at Pfizer. During that period of time, Pfizer had two drugs that were very that were being marketed very heavily. One was a cholesterol lowering drug, and one was a blood pressure lowering drug. And so it seemed like a natural that the people that took the cholesterol drugs also took the antihypertensive drugs. Seemed like a natural to combine those two formulations into one product, and they actually began to work on that idea because they had done studies to show that people would rather take one pill rather than two pills. Well, the other things interfered at the time, and I think it was the patents on the various products, so they lost interest. But the idea, I think, Pfizer thought was an excellent one, and so I think that it is something that could have tremendous potential to put two important within one formulation if it's possible.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I'll ask Bethany to just watch the chat if there are any other questions. But I would like to come back to you, Meredith. You talked about, you took us through the product developer's journey, and I just want to come back to Meredith and ask about, you didn't talk about other modalities like intrauterine systems. Would you like to go briefly into that, other modes of drug delivery, number one? And then number two, I'll come to you, Meredith, as well as Ariane. Size does matter, and Ariane, you've just talked about the DPP. And as a potential user myself, I'm hoping that the jaw prevention pill will have a size that I'll be able to swallow, because as we look at the co-encapsulated, it's huge, it's humongous. So Meredith, intrauterine system, and then we'll talk about size before we close off, and I'll hand to Bethany after this. Meredith.
Sure, and I think the question of size does matter also as related to the question you have for me, Nyaradzo, in terms of IUDs particularly. CONRAD, some years ago, we did explore and do some preclinical work with an MPT IUD for combining an antiretroviral and a contraceptive. And I think that is still really important, a really important modality to be considered. But the challenges there, of course, is the size. And, you know, while over the last several years, there's been a lot of advancements in improved long-acting drug delivery systems that can better deliver drugs and for longer durations, we're slowly coming along too with having more potent antiretrovirals to combine. The contraceptives, often be it hormonal like levonorgestrel or copper, are very long-acting and very potent from that type of a delivery system. But trying to marry that in the type of space you need to for a very tiny drug delivery system is the major challenge. So I don't think it's something that the field should forget and should continue to look at and invest in, but it requires really having the right drugs that can fit into that kind of a space and marry and meet the target product profile for something that really should be, you know, lasting multiple years, not just, you know, months.
And I'll quickly answer your question about size does matter. I fully agree, it does matter. Ever since Adam and Eve discovered the forbidden fruit in paradise, we know size does matter. But in terms of products and prevention products, smaller is better. It's not bigger is better. But we also have to be patient in the sense that the first generation product may have some characteristics that are appropriate and favorable and others that are not. I think that Viatris has done a great job at developing a combination product that is about the size of the Truvada pill, but we all know the Truvada pill is too big. Well, there are other next generation antiretroviral like TAF that, if are proven to be effective in women, could reduce the size of a DPP pill at the next generation. So we have to accept that we sometimes work in a stepwise fashion, and we can't get to the optimal product look, feel, and size from the get-go. And it's an iterative process. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're a little bit over the time, but this has just been such a fantastic discussion. And I want to thank our amazing speakers once again for being so generous with your time and thoughtfulness in putting these together, and to Nyaradzo for your stimulating comments and co-moderating this webinar. So yeah, so just in terms of as we wrap up the recording, I've had a couple people reach out about access to the slides. So the recording along with the slides will be posted in the next couple days on the IMPT website. We would also love if you could take this really quick survey, and for those of you who can recognize this, you can just hold up your phone to the scan bar, and then you can take the survey that way. So with that, you know, just thank you all again for your time and for the speakers. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and time. You can check out more information on the website here. All right, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.